Magandang umaga sa ating lahat, magandang hapon at magandang gabi kung saan man tayong lahat naroon. Unang-una, gusto magpasalamat sa PSSP sa paanyayang ito. I would like to thank PSSP and Ton specifically for the invitation to join the panel this morning and to congratulate him and PSSP and DOFA, for coming together, for bringing these two panels together. It's been said that in any crisis there is opportunity, and I think one of the things that has positive things that has come out of the situation is the opportunity to interact and meet one another online, such as the first session that we're having this morning. I've been asked to focus more on advocacy, uh, primarily because of my work, in the volunteer service program of the University of the Philippines and in the volunteering sector. No? But allow me to comment first on some of the things that Ton mentioned, the very comprehensive, presentation inviting food for thought. Of course, okay, wala siyang picture ng lechon, but again, this brings us together in trying to look into topics that have been raised several years before. Okay, so my sharing is coming from my experience with Sikolohiyang Pilipino. I was fortunate to be a student of Virgilio Enriquez. Okay, uh, I came in a bit later than Roji, so who's the founding daughter, founding member of PSSP, but it really was very informative, not only to have Dr. Enriquez as teacher, but as mentor, and to see him as a person who really lived what he talked about when he discussed Sikolohiyang Pilipino. In terms of advocacy, I'm also coming from work that I've done with the late Ledivina Carino on volunteering, and this has helped me shape volunteering in the Philippines. I'd like to thank my colleagues both at the Ugnayan ng Pahinungód, the Pambansang Samahan sa Sikolohiyang Pilipino Voice Network, and of course the Department of Psychology of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy in UP Diliman for the opportunities to engage in conversations and activities on Sikolohiyang Pilipino. So it's our 45th birthday. As a developmental psychologist, one would say what happens when one is 45. So that's usually seen as the start of middle adulthood or midlife. And what happens in midlife? There's stress, there are possibly doubts, but it's also seen as a stage of life transitions. Many things can change. So we talk about the transformative aspect of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. At 45, one looks back at what has happened and looks forward to seeing new things to come. At 45, we're the middle age, which is 45 to 60. Usually one is expected to be more actively involved in the civic life, okay, of one's community, to be more socially responsible. And I think that's pretty much where we are in the Pambansang Samahan sa Sikolohiyang Pilipino. I think that PSSP has made inroads. I will not repeat what uh, Roji has mentioned earlier and other panelists, but we are, I think, in the stage where we have a lot of things to look back on and to be proud of these things that we have accomplished in the last 45 years. Uh, Also taking note of the comments, the critiques that people have made against SP, which is all part, of growth and development. One of the things that has been mentioned about PSSP, about SP, and which Don mentioned is in his presentation is what is again SP 45 years later. But we do ask ourselves at 45, who am I and what have I been and what do I want to be in the next so many years forward? When we ask ourselves these questions or we ask about SP, I think one of the things that has been mentioned is language. So when people say, hindi ba ang SP ay sikoliyan ng mga Tagalog? I remember always telling my classes in SP, no matter where these classes are held, okay, that's precisely the reason that we have these classes, so that people are able to contribute their own perspectives, coming from their culture, coming from the regions, no, where they grew up. And the limitation as to language will persist only if people do not engage in conversations about this. So I guess even to this date, that is a topic that we should engage in. No? There were bitter arguments in the past about uh, what will happen if one publishes or speaks or writes in English. What does that mean? Does that make one more or less of something? And I think it's good to go back to that discussion, not just so there is argument, but to see how we have managed also to address that situation. Okay. Another thing that has been said of SP, and I think we will remember, no, the first textbooks on Sikolohiyang Pilipino that Rogie published, no, SP. We always think, well, I always think of it as that yellow book on Sikolohiyang Filipino, Teorya, Metodo at Gamit, theory, research method, and practice or application. So when we talk about SP and saying, well, there are developments in the area of teaching, and we see the curriculum in higher education, no, identifying SP as one of the two courses that one can look into. I think that is already a fruit of the work that SP has done. We also talk about research methodology, and earlier in the DOFA panel, I think there was mention of the research methodologies that would be appropriate to use in the kinds of things that we are interrogating or wanting to explain and understand. And then separately, there is the practice, or in one slide that I saw, practice and outreach as well. Okay. Um, I understand and I support developments in this area, but I'd also like to think that um, if we talk about engaged scholarship, all of these come together so that it can be difficult, okay, or even unnecessary to dichotomize, to partial things out, to compartmentalize and say that SP in this area is teaching, in this area its focus is research, and in this area it's practice. One example would be in teaching where we use service learning, for instance, where there is a lot of, you might say, outreach as part of learning. And I think that Sikolohiyang Filipino lends itself very much into teaching our students at the same time, doing so by providing opportunities for service and learning about themselves and the communities that they engage with. Okay. So let me maybe shift into what I've been asked to do primarily, and please just signal me if I'm going overboard. I forgot to turn on my timer. So the area that I've been active with in the last so many years or decades has been in the volunteering sector. And volunteering, as some of you might know, formal volunteering in particular is celebrated in the Philippines every December. We have in the Philippines what is called the National Volunteer Month, okay, by Presidential Proclamation number 55 series of 1998. So since 1998, the Philippines has been celebrating National Volunteer Month in December. And the work that we do in volunteering, not only in the University of the Philippines through its Ugnayan ng Pahinungód program, but in the Philippines through various volunteer organizations. Okay? It shows the kind of contribution that we have to the international volunteering arena. Now, I recall decades back when the voluntary services overseas was just looking at international volunteering at the time. So there was a lot of debate on, whether Filipinos should volunteer abroad or should stay in the Philippines. And in those discussions, I think what became very clear was that Filipinos serve anywhere and everywhere they're at. Okay? Uh, there was also an appreciation for what was then called international volunteering and national volunteering. And that bringing together people who had served in different parts of the world would contribute to a better understanding of volunteering. So, what am I saying? That it is important to recognize the work that is done in the Philippines in the volunteering sector. And by saying so, I would like to think that this is really Sikolohiyang Pilipino in action because this reminds us of what Enriquez himself had said about Sikolohiyang Pilipino, that Sikolohiyang Filipino is a liberation and a liberating psychology. And it is through volunteering, okay, understood as serving that is sa sariling kusa, na walang kapalit, at para sa kapwa. I know that my two co-authors are here. One is on the panel, Atoy Navarro, and I just saw a comment from Jaya Kat. Okay? And so, given that, I think even articulating volunteering to be that is Sikolohiyang Pilipino in action. And the many activities that we've done. So if you look at Sikolohiyang Pilipino as being liberating, okay, and a liberation psychology, we look towards the empowerment of people, the transformative nature of volunteering, so that people are able to address their own issues, to address concerns, and for themselves to work in partnership with others to making a better life for everyone. When you talk about volunteering, I think one thing that has been very clear, in the last years is we no longer use the term beneficiary. Okay? We talk about community partners because really development is something that is done in partnership. It is not a unilateral activity. Okay? And to me, this resonates very much with the Enriquez view of research, where we do not talk about a research partners as subjects. They are not subjects, they are participants. We work with them towards a common goal. So again, in this area, I'd see that Sikolohiyang Pilipino is alive. It is something that is really very clearly articulated in the way that we do our advocacy. And from my particular perspective that I am speaking about today, that would be volunteering. So I think I've used up my time, but I think that, again, Sikolohiyang Pilipino, when we talk about teaching, we talk about direct and indirect strategies. And I think that Sikolohiyang Pilipino is taught in many different ways, directly using direct and indirect strategies. But one of the ways by which Sikolohiyang Pilipino is discovered, is disseminated, and appreciated by people is through the different formal and informal, indirect ways that we share our knowledge and experience of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. And in this particular instance, it is alive and well in the volunteering sector. So thank you very much.